Yeah, you're all probably surprised I saw this movie this previous weekend instead of Sausage Party. True story, guys, I actually did intend to see Sausage Party, and then I heard about that really weird, gross food orgy scene at the very end of it, so I decided, you know what? I think I'll see Pete's Dragon instead. So Pete's Dragon is a remake to the 1977 movie of the same name. I was really interested to see this movie simply because the original Pete's Dragon came out nearly 40 years ago. The technology and visual effects, that's really improved. There's so much more you can do with movies nowadays. And from the trailers I saw with Pete's Dragon, I thought this could actually be a really awesome family movie that everyone can enjoy. And now that I have seen this movie, I gotta say, there is some good and bad with this movie. Now let me get into that. So in the beginning of the movie, we see Pete, he's like 5 years old, he's on a road trip with his parents. And then out of nowhere, the three of them just get into a horrible car accident. Their car literally ends up in the middle of the forest. Pete's parents are both dead, and now he's alone in the woods all by himself. Really uplifting kids movie, huh? And while he's in the forest, Pete then just gets cornered by this giant pack of wolves that's ready to kill him right there. But it's okay, the wolf pack ran away before it could attack Pete because the wolf pack saw this giant big green dragon that obviously scared the shit out of all of them. So yeah, of course they took off. But strangely enough, when Pete sees this dragon, he wasn't intimidated by it at all. He just willingly approached it, ready to be best friends with it, wasn't even slightly intimidated by this thing. I don't know, but if that was me, and maybe this was because I was a pussy when I was 5 years old, but if I saw a giant dragon staring at me in the middle of the forest, I'd shit myself and then I'd run off. I'd probably just be willing to take my chances with the wolf pack instead. So anyway, 6 years go by. Pete's been living in this forest with that dragon that he's now named Elliot. The two of them are best buds now. Elliot's been helping Pete survive in the forest this whole time. And then along the way, Pete gets discovered in this forest by a park ranger played by Bryce Dallas Howard along with her fiance and his young 10-year-old daughter. If I'm being honest, from this point forward, not very much else happens. I mean, of course, no one has any idea who Pete is. They don't know where he came from, who his family is. So as a result, these three people, they take Pete into their home, you know, try to get him accustomed to human life once again. And along the way, you see Pete becoming attached to every member of this family, really feeling like he is forming a family with them, which is really nice and good for the movie. But he still wants to get back to the forest because he still wants to find Elliot. And of course, no one really entirely believes him because he's a kid and because no one believes in dragons. However, Bryce Dallas Howard agrees to take Pete back to the forest to find Elliot because her father for so long has claimed that when he was young, he discovered the same dragon in that forest. So they all go back to the forest. Pete introduces Bryce Dallas Howard and her family to Elliot. However, if I'm being honest, this is one of the gripes that I have with this movie. And that is the fact that this is around now the final third of this movie, and we're finally seeing more of Elliot. I mean, in the beginning of this movie, we saw some of him, and then in the second act of this movie, we saw very little bits and pieces of him throughout that. It's just so weird that in a movie called Pete's Dragon, we're finally seeing more of Pete's Dragon. I would have liked it a lot more if this movie focused more on the friendship between Pete and Elliot. This movie doesn't really do that. It focused more on Pete discovering this family and becoming a part of this family and discovering what it means to be in a family again. And we've seen that kind of story several times in movies. However, the movie does finally start to kick in a little bit more drama here when we find out that Bryce Dallas Howard's fiance's brother, a construction worker, has apparently been hunting down Elliot this whole time because he discovered signs of Elliot when Pete was discovered in the forest. So of course he's gonna go out hunting a dragon because he's like, I discovered that thing, I'm gonna be famous as fuck. So yeah, this guy, Gavin is his name, he and his men, they capture Elliot, they're prepared to bring him to town. Luckily though, Pete and the 10-year-old girl, they're able to free Elliot from captivity. Now Gavin's pissed off, he wants to set up a roadblock so they can take Elliot down and capture him again. And of course at this point, Elliot's just pissed off with everyone trying to manhandle him, so what does he do? He perches himself onto this bridge where all the police are trying to come after him, and he just starts breathing fire onto all of the police. Immediately as that happens though, Bryce Dallas Howard and her soon-to-be husband, they're in this car that's on this bridge, and eventually they fall through the bridge. You think they're gonna die, but luckily Elliot swoops down, catches them on his back, and flies them to safety. And then immediately after that, Pete and Elliot, they go back to the woods. They realize that now they have to say goodbye to each other, and Elliot just basically flies away. However, as I was leaving this movie with my girlfriend, she described Elliot perfectly. As we were driving home, she looked at me and she was all like, hey, do you know what Elliot reminded me of? A Sour Patch Kid. You know, first he was sour, trying to set everyone on fire, then he was sweet, saving Bryce Dallas Howard and her husband, and then he was just gone when he left Pete. And the second she said that to me, I was sitting there like, oh my gosh, Elliot is totally a Sour Patch Kid. Or Sour Patch Dragon, if you want to be more accurate. And then at the end of this movie, we see that Pete is still living with Bryce Dallas Howard as a member of her family. And they all drive off into the mountains to visit Elliot, where he is now staying. And what do they also see? A ton of other dragons just flying out of the mountains, just circling in the sky. Literally, so many of them that look just like Elliot. Which now just brings up like a million other questions. You're sitting there just like, where'd you all come from? Seriously though, this movie gave no explanation at all to anything about the dragons in this movie. Where did Elliot and the rest of these dragons come from? How did he end up in the forest? And then the movie ends without giving any explanation to that whatsoever. So all in all, I will say Pete's Dragon is a fine movie. Everyone in this movie gives a fine performance for what they need to do. The little kid who played Pete, he did a good job in this movie. He didn't annoy me like a lot of kid actors do. The dragon Elliot looked good visually. The movie has a lot of good, cute, heartfelt moments throughout it. But that being said, not much really happens in this movie, which really makes me feel like the movie's dragging on way longer than it should be. The movie really doesn't give an explanation to where Elliot came from. The movie doesn't even really focus on Elliot that much for that matter. Like I said, this movie would have been so much better if the primary focus of it was the friendship between Pete and Elliot, and not so much on Pete joining a new family. And in the end, this is definitely a family movie that kids will like way more than adults. And although I haven't seen the original Pete's Dragon, I'm willing to bet that this movie is probably not going to leave the same kind of legacy that Pete's Dragon did. So that's all I gotta say, guys. Thank you so much for watching my video. Don't forget to leave a comment, like, subscribe, and I will see you all next time.